It was a cold morning in the small town. The sky was painted in soft shades of gray, and the air carried the faint smell of rain from the night before. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional car passing by. The police chief had just finished his early morning patrol and decided to stop at the local gas station to fill up his car before heading back to the station. He liked this gas station. It was small, family-owned, and the owner always greeted him with a warm smile. He felt at home here in a town where everyone knew each other. As he pulled into the pump, he noticed a woman standing near the entrance of the store. She looked around 40, dressed neatly but in a way that suggested she was used to demanding things and getting her way. She seemed to be waiting for someone, though her eyes soon found him. She recognized him immediately, even before he had a chance to greet anyone. The police chief had a presence about him that was hard to ignore, not because he was intimidating, but because people in the town respected him. He had served the community for over 20 years, always fair, always calm, and always observant. He knew the streets, the people, and the unwritten rules of his town. The woman walked towards him, her steps confident. She didn't hesitate or show any sign of nervousness. When she reached him, she smiled in a way that was meant to be friendly but carried a subtle edge. She began to speak immediately. "I was wondering if you could do me a favor," she said, her tone casual, almost like she had a right to ask. "I could really use some gas. Just fill up my tank. I'm sure it wouldn't be a big deal for you." The police chief froze for a moment, slightly taken aback by the request. It wasn't that he minded helping people. He had done it countless times in his life, sometimes giving rides, sometimes assisting with small emergencies. But this was different. This was a direct request for free gas, nothing to do with duty or necessity. He could see the expectant look in her eyes, the assumption that his position somehow meant he could give her what she wanted. It was a bold request, and one that put him on the spot in front of other customers. "Ma'am," he said carefully, keeping his tone polite but firm. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. It wouldn't be fair to anyone else. I hope you understand." Her smile didn't falter. Instead, it grew a little wider, almost challenging. "Oh, come on. You're the chief, right? Surely you can make an exception just this once. It's not like anyone will know." She leaned slightly closer, trying to make her words seem more persuasive than forceful. She spoke as if the law itself somehow belonged to her in this moment. The chief straightened his posture. He looked around briefly, noting the people who had stopped to watch the interaction. Some seemed curious. Others just wanted to see how he would handle the situation. He knew that giving in, even a little, would set a precedent that he didn't want to establish. Being a public figure came with responsibility, and he had learned early on that fairness and integrity mattered more than temporary comfort or approval. "Ma'am," said again, his voice calm but unwavering. "My job is to serve the community and uphold the rules, not to make exceptions for anyone based on personal requests. I have to treat everyone equally." She let out a short laugh, one that was meant to sound lighthearted but carried a hint of frustration. "Equal for everyone? Sometimes rules can be bent for the right reasons. I'm helping people too, I do a lot for the community. Surely that counts for something." The chief listened patiently. He could feel the tension rising, both from her persistence and the growing attention from onlookers. He had dealt with difficult people before, but there was something about her approach that was different. She wasn't aggressive in a threatening way. She was confident, almost manipulative, using charm and logic to try to get her way. This was a challenge not just to his authority, but to his patience and principles. "Ma'am," he said once more, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "I respect anyone who contributes to the community, but that doesn't change the rules. If I start making exceptions, even for good reasons, it would not be fair to anyone else who follows the rules. My responsibility is to everyone, not just one person." She paused for a moment, clearly thinking he might give in, but when she realized he wasn't going to budge, her expression changed slightly. She tried a different approach, softer this time, appealing to empathy. "I've had a really hard week," she said, her voice carrying a note of desperation. "I just need a little help. Surely you can understand that." The chief felt a twinge of sympathy, as anyone would in that situation. He knew what it was like to face hardships and understand struggles, but he also knew that allowing his emotions to dictate actions in his role could lead to bigger problems. Compassion didn't mean bending the rules when it compromised fairness. He shook his head gently. "I do understand that everyone goes through hard times," he replied, "but my job is to make sure that fairness is maintained. If I start making exceptions for one person, it won't be fair to anyone else. I hope you can understand why I can't do this," she sighed, a little louder this time, as if trying to show her disappointment. But the chief remained calm. The crowd that had gathered seemed to respect his stance, nodding slightly and murmuring to each other. Some even whispered words of encouragement. The chief noticed this, but he didn't let it affect his decision. He knew that leadership often meant standing firm, even when it was uncomfortable. After a moment of silence, the woman straightened her posture and gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Well, I guess rules are rules, aren't they?" she said, though her tone suggested she was not entirely pleased. She turned and walked toward the store, muttering under her breath, perhaps planning her next move. The chief watched her go, his mind already processing the encounter. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. People like her, who were persistent and confident, didn't usually give up so easily. But for now, he had made the right choice. He had acted with integrity, upheld fairness, and shown calm leadership in front of others. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about doing what was right as he finished filling his tank and prepared to leave. He reflected on the nature of leadership. It wasn't about popularity or making people happy in the short term. It was about consistency, fairness, and earning respect through actions rather than words. He had learned that lesson many times over his career, and each encounter like this reinforced it. Driving back to the station, he thought about the subtle lessons in human behavior that such moments revealed. Some people believed that authority meant favors, that positions of power were a shortcut to personal gain. But real leadership, he reminded himself, was about guiding, serving, and setting an example. It was about knowing when to say yes and when to say no, and having the courage to act in the interest of the whole community rather than yielding to individual demands. The morning passed slowly. With the usual rhythm of police work resuming, calls came in, reports were filed, and the chief moved from one task to another. Yet the memory of the encounter lingered. It wasn't a dramatic event, but it was a reminder that integrity was tested in everyday moments, often in small ways that people might overlook. A simple request for free gas had become a quiet test of character, a moment where values were weighed against convenience. As the day went on, he noticed subtle reactions from people who had witnessed the encounter. Some smiled as they recognized his firmness. Others nodded in silent agreement. The chief didn't seek approval, but he understood the importance of setting an example. Leadership wasn't always about grand gestures. Often, it was about the choices made in ordinary moments. Choices that reflected a commitment to fairness, honesty, and respect for everyone. By the time he returned to his office, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He had handled the situation as he believed was right. He had not given in to pressure, and he had not compromised his principles. The town might not notice every small decision, but over time, the consistency of such choices built trust and respect. It reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place, why he continued to serve, and why he valued integrity above all else. In the quiet moments of the afternoon, he allowed himself a brief reflection. Life was full of unexpected requests, challenges, and tests of character. Some were small, like a request for free gas, and some were large, involving difficult decisions that affected many people. But each moment offered an opportunity to reaffirm one's values, to show the community what leadership truly meant. And so, the morning encounter at the gas station became more than just a strange request. It became a small but significant affirmation of the chief's approach to his role. It was a reminder that integrity required courage, patience, and calm resolve. It was a reminder that fairness above all was the cornerstone of trust and respect in a community. And it was a reminder that sometimes simplest moments could leave the deepest impressions. After the encounter at the gas station, the police chief couldn't help but think about the woman and her bold request. He knew that it was unlikely to be the last time he would see her. People who expected special treatment rarely gave up after a single attempt. Yet he also knew that his responsibility as a leader was not to give in to anyone's pressure, no matter how persuasive or persistent they were. It was easy to say yes in the moment, to avoid discomfort or confrontation. But the consequences of bending the rules could ripple far beyond that small act. He understood that each decision he made was a reflection of his values, his judgment, and the principles he stood for. He arrived back at the station and began reviewing reports from the morning calls. Officers were busy with routine patrols, traffic stops, and neighborhood checks. The town had its usual mix of minor disputes, local complaints, and occasional accidents. The chief's mind wandered, reflecting on the contrast between these ordinary duties and the unusual request he had faced. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of law enforcement, yet it tested something deeper: his sense of fairness and integrity. He knew that leadership often revealed itself not in grand heroics, but in the small, quiet decisions made every day. During a brief break, he stepped into his office and poured himself a cup of coffee. The aroma was comforting, a simple pleasure amidst the responsibilities and stresses of his role. As he sipped slowly, he thought about human behavior and entitlement. Some people believed that positions of authority granted privileges beyond the normal rules, that knowing the right person could open doors that were closed to everyone else. He had seen it many times over the years, and he had learned that patience and clear boundaries were essential. Compassion did not mean bending the rules, and empathy did not require giving in to every request. He decided to seek advice, not because he doubted his judgment, but because he valued perspective and reflection. He called two trusted colleagues, both of whom had worked with him for many years. One was a fellow officer who had risen through the ranks with a similar commitment to fairness. The other was a longtime administrative assistant who had seen the ebb and flow of town politics and public expectations. Both had witnessed his handling of difficult situations in the past and provided thoughtful input. When he explained the situation, his colleagues listened carefully. The officer nodded and said, "It sounds like you handled it perfectly. Giving in now might seem like a small thing, but it sets a precedent. Once someone believes they can ask for special treatment, it's hard to stop. People start expecting it, and then fairness goes out the window." Administrative assistant added, "Sometimes people test boundaries to see how far they can go. It's not about the gas. It's about control. They want to see if they can manipulate the system, and if you give in, it encourages that behavior. You did the right thing by staying calm and consistent." Their words reinforced the chief's own reflections. Leadership required consistency. It required the courage to stand firm, even when it might be unpopular or uncomfortable. It required seeing beyond the immediate situation to the long-term impact of one's actions. He appreciated their input, but he also knew that ultimately the decision rested with him. It was a responsibility he had accepted long ago, and he would continue to uphold it. Later that day, the chief returned to routine duties, but his mind occasionally drifted back to the woman. He considered her motivations. Was she desperate? Was she testing him for personal gain? Or did she genuinely believe that her contributions to the community should grant her exceptions? He didn't have all the answers, but he understood that his role was not to judge motive, but to uphold principles. In doing so, he maintained fairness, trust, and the respect of the community. As the afternoon unfolded, the chief found himself reflecting on similar situations he had encountered in the past. There had been times when people had tried to use charm, persuasion, or social status to influence decisions. Each time he had faced a choice to comply for convenience or to uphold fairness for everyone. The decisions were not always easy, but they were always necessary. They shaped not only his reputation, but also the culture of the police, department, and the broader community. He thought about the impact of bending rules, even for good reasons. When one person receives special treatment, others notice. It can create resentment, confusion, and a sense of injustice. It can erode trust in leadership and authority, sometimes in ways that are difficult to repair. Conversely, when rules are applied consistently, even when it requires firmness, people begin to understand and respect the system. They learn that fairness is not about favoritism, but about treating everyone equally. The chief also considered the human side of the encounter. The woman had approached him not with hostility, but with confidence, expecting a positive response. He could empathize with her desire for help, yet he could not let empathy override principles. He realized that true compassion sometimes meant saying no, even when it was difficult. Providing short-term relief at the cost of fairness could lead to long-term harm, both for the individual and for the community as a whole. As evening approached, the chief returned home, reflecting on the lessons of the day. Leadership, he thought, was not a title, but a practice. It was demonstrated through actions, through the choices made in moments that might seem small, but carried significance. Saying no to a single request for free gas might appear trivial. Yet it was a moment that tested values, reinforced principles, and modeled integrity for others. At home, he shared a quiet dinner with his family, savoring the ordinary rhythms of life. He did not dwell on the stress of the day, but allowed himself to appreciate the stability of his home, the warmth of conversation, and the sense of purpose that came from serving his community. Even in moments of challenge, he found satisfaction in knowing that he had acted with integrity. That night, as he prepared for bed, he reflected on the ongoing nature of his role. Challenges would continue to arise, each testing patience, judgment, and principles. Some would be obvious, others subtle, but each was an opportunity to reinforce the values he had embraced throughout his career. He understood that leadership required vigilance, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. It required seeing beyond immediate discomfort to the broader consequences of each decision. He also thought about the woman. He knew that she might return, perhaps more persistent, perhaps more creative in her approach. That was part of life in a small town where everyone knew each other and news traveled quickly. People would test boundaries, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of expectation. The chief felt ready for whatever came next. He knew that staying true to his principles was not always easy, but it was always necessary. It was the foundation of trust, respect, and the community's belief in fair and consistent leadership. As sleep finally came, he felt a quiet sense of resolve. The day had presented a challenge, small in scale, but significant in principle. He had faced it with calm, fairness, and integrity. He had listened, reflected, and reaffirmed his values. And in doing so, he had reminded himself why he chose this path, why he remained committed to his role, and why he valued consistency and fairness above all else. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new interactions, and perhaps another test of character, but he felt prepared. The lessons of today would guide him, and he knew that integrity, patience, and firmness would continue to define his leadership. The next morning, the police chief arrived at the gas station once again, his mind alert and ready for whatever might happen. The town was just waking up, and the streets were quiet, except for the occasional delivery truck and early commuters. He pulled his car up to the pump and began filling the tank. He was trying to focus on the routine of his work and not the unusual events of the previous day. But he knew deep down that today might be different. He had a feeling that the woman would return. Sure enough, she appeared not long after he began filling his car. This time her steps were quicker, more determined. She walked directly toward him, her expression confident, almost expectant. She didn't pause or hesitate, signaling that she had a clear intention. The chief noticed that a few other people had gathered near the station, curious about the unfolding situation. Some smiled knowingly, while others simply watched silently, sensing that something unusual was about to occur. When she reached him, she spoke with a tone that combined charm and insistence. "Good morning, Chief. I was hoping you might reconsider helping me yesterday. I've had a lot on my plate, and it would really mean a lot if you could just help me out this once." Her eyes looked for a reaction, trying to gauge whether he might waver. The chief listened calmly, keeping his posture straight and his voice steady. "Good morning. I remember our conversation yesterday. As I explained, I can provide free gas. My responsibility is to treat everyone fairly and equally. That doesn't change, regardless of circumstances." The woman's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. She leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice as if to make her words more persuasive. I understand fairness, Chief, but surely some situations deserve exceptions. I'm helping people too, doing things for the community that matter. It's not just about me. Isn't there a way you could make this work? The chief took a slow breath, aware of the growing attention from onlookers. He knew that every word he spoke could be heard and interpreted. Leadership, he reminded himself, was tested in these moments. He needed to remain firm but calm, patient but resolute. Giving in now would send the wrong message, not only to the woman, but also to the entire town. "Ma'am," he said gently but firmly, "I respect your contributions, and I recognize your intentions. However, I cannot make exceptions. My role requires consistency and fairness. Every person in this community deserves the same treatment, without favoritism. That is the only way to maintain trust and respect." Her expression shifted, showing a hint of frustration mixed with disbelief. She tried another approach, softer this time, appealing to empathy. "I've really had a tough week, Chief. It's been overwhelming, and I just need a little help." "I didn't think it would be such a big deal to ask." The chief felt a pang of sympathy, as any person would in that situation. He understood what it meant to struggle, to face difficult weeks, to feel the weight of responsibilities and pressures. Yet, he also knew that empathy did not justify bending the rules. Principles, he reminded himself, were stronger than temporary convenience. "I understand that everyone has difficult times," he replied calmly. "But my job is not to provide special treatment. If I start making exceptions, it won't be fair to others who follow the rules. It's important that everyone is treated the same way." The woman's frustration grew, but she tried to mask it with a smile. She raised her voice slightly, attempting to draw the attention of bystanders and sway the situation in her favor. "Chief, surely you understand why someone might need a little help now and then. People rely on kindness, not just rules. Isn't that what leadership is about?" The chief could see the subtle attempt to manipulate the moment to appeal to public perception. He glanced around at the onlookers, some nodding silently, others observing with curiosity. He understood the dynamics at play. Leadership was not about pleasing everyone or avoiding discomfort. It was about doing what was right, even under scrutiny. "Leadership," he said clearly, "is about fairness, integrity, and consistency. True leadership requires making difficult choices, even when they are unpopular. Providing free gas for one person while leaving others to pay their way would not be fair. It would undermine the trust of the community." She paused, realizing that her usual strategies were not working. She tried one more approach, softer, almost pleading. "Please, Chief, just this once. I promise I won't ask again. I really need this. Can't you make an exception?" The chief shook his head gently, maintaining eye contact, conveying both firmness and understanding. "I cannot. I hope you understand that this decision is not personal. It's about fairness for everyone." "I appreciate your understanding." There was a brief silence. The woman looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, noticing the subtle support for the chief from people who respected his stance. She gave a tight-lipped smile and turned toward the store, muttering under her breath. It was clear she was disappointed, but she had no choice but to leave without the response she had hoped for. The chief finished filling his tank and walked into the store to pay. The atmosphere was calm, with customers going about their business, some nodding in quiet acknowledgement of the chief's composure. The gas station owner approached him quietly and said, "You handled that well. She can be very persuasive, but you stayed calm and fair. People noticed that." The chief nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. It's not about showing strength. It's about doing what's right and consistent. People will test boundaries, but integrity matters more than temporary convenience." Throughout the day, the chief continued his routine duties, but he reflected on the encounter. It wasn't the kind of situation that appeared in reports or official logs, yet it was a test of character. Small moments like these defined leadership. It was not enough to act decisively in emergencies or major events. The quiet choices, the everyday decisions, also mattered. He thought about the woman and what she represented. People who demanded special treatment often did not recognize the broader impact of their requests. They sought immediate benefit without considering fairness, equity, or long-term consequences. The chief understood this, and he also recognized the importance of patience, empathy, and calm authority in dealing with such challenges. Later that evening, the chief reflected on how people perceived authority. Some saw power as a tool for personal advantage. Others respected it when it was wielded with integrity and fairness. He believed that the latter was more important. The trust of the community was built on consistent actions, on decisions that demonstrated fairness, and on a commitment to principles rather than short-term gain. At home, he shared dinner with his family. The conversation light but grounded in the ordinary rhythms of life. Even after a challenging day, he found solace in these moments, reminding himself that leadership was not just about public perception, but also about personal integrity and balance. He reflected on the small victories, like standing firm in the face of persuasion, and how they reinforced his values. Before going to bed, he reviewed the day in his mind. He considered the lessons learned, that fairness requires courage, that empathy does not mean bending rules, and that integrity is demonstrated through consistent choices. Leadership was a practice, not a title. It was shown in the everyday moments, in the decisions that tested patience and resolve. He also considered the likelihood that the woman might return. People, persistent in their requests, rarely gave up easily. But he felt prepared. He knew that staying true to his principles was essential, not just for him, but for the community he served. The quiet resolve that had guided him throughout his career would continue to guide him in the face of challenges, large or small. As sleep approached, he reflected on the nature of responsibility. Authority was not about granting favors or seeking approval. It was about serving with fairness, integrity, and consistency. He understood that these moments, while small, left lasting impressions. They shaped the community's perception of leadership and defined the trust placed in him by the people he served. The evening passed quietly, but the lessons of the day remained vivid in his mind. Standing firm, even when it was uncomfortable, was a demonstration of strength and character. Showing empathy without compromising principles reinforced respect and trust. Leadership, he reminded himself, was a combination of courage, patience, and unwavering commitment to fairness. And in this small town, every interaction, every decision, and every moment mattered, leaving a mark on both the community and the individual making the choice. The day after the confrontation at the gas station, the town was buzzing quietly with news of what had happened. It wasn't a scandal, nor was it a major headline, but in a small town, news traveled fast, and people were talking. The woman had been persistent, bold, and unapologetic in her request for free gas from the police chief. Some residents had witnessed the exchange firsthand, while others had heard the story secondhand from friends, neighbors, or coworkers. In small towns, these kinds of stories spread quickly, taking on new details as they went. But the core of it, the chief standing firm, remained clear. The police chief arrived at the station early. As he always did, ready to begin the day, he was aware that he might encounter questions, comments, or even criticism from the public. People had different opinions. Part of his role was to navigate the community with fairness and understanding, even when he faced scrutiny. He knew that leadership often involved balancing public perception with the unwavering application of principles. The previous day had been a quiet but powerful reminder of the challenges that came with his position. Throughout the morning, officers came in to report on their patrols and tasks. Some mentioned seeing neighbors discussing the gas station incident. There was a subtle, unspoken curiosity about how the chief had handled it. It was a small moment of attention, but it carried weight. People looked to him not just for law enforcement, but for the example he set in everyday decisions. His actions, no matter how small, reflected the values of fairness, patience, and integrity that the town had come to expect from him. Later in the day, the chief received a call from the local community center. Someone had posted about the incident on social media, exaggerating parts of it and portraying the woman as having been treated unfairly. Comments poured in from townspeople, some expressing support for the chief's stance, while others criticized him for being rigid or lacking empathy. The chief listened carefully, understanding that public opinion was varied and often emotional. He knew that social media amplified perceptions, and that a small story could become a larger conversation quickly. He reflected on how people interpreted actions. Some valued kindness above all else, sometimes equating flexibility with compassion. Others valued consistency, fairness, and the knowledge that rules applied equally to everyone. Balancing these perspectives was a subtle art of leadership. The chief understood that he couldn't please everyone, but he could remain consistent and principled, which, over time, earned trust and respect. During a lunch break, the chief met with a few longtime residents who had been observing the situation closely. One elderly neighbor spoke first, smiling gently. "You handled that perfectly," she said. "It might not seem like much, but standing firm like that shows everyone what integrity really looks like. People notice even if they don't say it." Another resident, a local business owner, nodded in agreement. It's rare to see someone in your position act with that kind of consistency. Some would give in just to avoid a scene, but you stayed calm, fair, and firm. That's leadership, plain and simple. Their words reinforced the chief's sense of purpose. Leadership was not always about dramatic gestures or major decisions. It was often about the small, quiet moments where values were tested and principles were applied. Standing firm in front of a few onlookers at a gas station was just one example of the countless moments that defined his role. As the day continued, the chief returned to his regular duties, patrolling the streets, attending meetings, and addressing community concerns. Yet the gas station incident lingered in his mind, not as a source of stress, but as a lesson in the subtle dynamics of human behavior. People tested boundaries, some intentionally, some out of habit, and it was the response to these moments that shaped the culture of the community and the perception of authority. By mid afternoon, the chief received an unexpected visitor at the station. It was the woman, back again, this time accompanied by a friend. Her approach was more cautious, but her intent was clear. She wanted to try once more, hoping perhaps that persistence would pay off, or that the presence of another person might sway the outcome. The chief greeted her calmly, his demeanor unchanged, signaling that he would approach this encounter with the same fairness and firmness as before. "Good afternoon, Chief," she said, her tone attempting warmth and friendliness. "I wanted to talk to you again about yesterday. Maybe we can find a way to work this out. It's just a little favor, and I think it could really help." The chief listened patiently, keeping his posture steady and his tone measured. "Good afternoon. I understand your request, but my answer remains the same. I cannot provide free gas. It's important to treat everyone equally, and making exceptions would not be fair." She paused for a moment, then tried a new approach, speaking softly but with a hint of urgency. "I promise, this is the only time I'll ask. I really need this, Chief. It's important for me, and I think you understand that." The chief nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without giving in. "I understand that you have needs, and I respect that. But fairness and consistency are more important in my role. This decision is not personal. It is about ensuring trust and equality in the community." The woman sighed, clearly frustrated, but she didn't argue further. She glanced at her friend, who looked slightly embarrassed by the situation, and then she turned to leave. The chief watched her go, reflecting on the persistence and expectations that people sometimes carried. It was a reminder that leadership involved patience, empathy, and the ability to maintain principles even when confronted with repeated challenges. As evening approached, the chief reviewed his day and the unfolding story in the community. He understood that public opinion was mixed and that social media could amplify perceptions in unpredictable ways. Yet he remained confident that consistency and fairness were more enduring than temporary approval. Trust was built over time through repeated demonstration of integrity. In each encounter, even one as seemingly small as a request for free gas, contributed to that trust. That night, at home, he shared a quiet dinner with his family. Conversations were warm, filled with small details of daily life, and yet the events of the day lingered in his mind. He reflected on how people interpreted authority, and how sometimes a simple act of saying no could communicate more about leadership than a dramatic gesture. It was a reminder that integrity and fairness were not just abstract ideals, they were lived-through decisions, words, and actions in real-life moments. After dinner, he spent time reviewing notes from his officers, reflecting on reports and preparing for the next day. The gas station incident had become more than just a momentary challenge. It was a lesson in resilience, patience, and the subtle responsibilities of leadership. He understood that consistency mattered, that principles mattered, and that every small action contributed to the culture and values of the community. Late in the evening, he took a moment for quiet reflection, thinking about the woman, the community, and the lessons learned. Leadership required more than authority, required the courage to make difficult decisions, the patience to handle persistent challenges, and the empathy to understand people without compromising principles. Each encounter, no matter how small, was an opportunity to model these values, to show that fairness and integrity mattered more than temporary convenience or pressure. As he prepared for bed, he reflected on the broader implications of the day. People would continue to test boundaries, to push for exceptions, to challenge authority. How one responded to these moments defined not only the individual leader, but also the trust and respect of the community. The police chief felt prepared, grounded in the understanding that his role was to serve fairly, consistently, and with integrity, no matter the circumstances. Throughout the night, he thought about the subtle but powerful lessons of the day. Standing firm, even when it was uncomfortable, reinforced trust. Showing empathy without compromising principles demonstrated understanding and wisdom. Leadership, he reminded himself, was not about pleasing everyone, it was about fairness, consistency, and the long-term well-being of the community. The following morning, he woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Challenges would continue to arise, each testing patience, judgment, and values. Some would be small, like the request for free gas. Others would carry greater consequences. Yet he felt confident in his approach, to act with integrity, to uphold fairness, and to model the values he believed were essential to effective leadership. Each day, each interaction, each choice contributed to the broader story of trust, respect, and ethical governance. And with that understanding, he felt ready to meet whatever came next, committed to the principles that guided his role and shaped the community he served. The following week passed quietly in the town. Though the story of the woman at the gas station continued to circulate in small circles, by now, most residents knew the tale. Some had witnessed it firsthand, while others had heard it from friends or on social media. The narrative had grown slightly with each retelling, some details exaggerated, some softened, but the essence remained the same. The police chief had stood firm, refusing to grant a personal favor that went against fairness and principle. The chief arrived at the station early one morning, the sky still tinged with soft shades of dawn. He was aware of the attention the incident had drawn, yet he treated the day like any other. Patrols needed attention, reports needed reviewing, and calls required timely responses. Leadership, he reminded himself, was a balance between public perception and personal integrity, between visible actions and quiet responsibilities. Each day brought small tests that, when approached with consistency, reinforced trust and respect. During his morning briefing, the chief discussed upcoming community events and routine patrols with his team. He emphasized fairness, attention to detail, and responsiveness, reminding his officers that their work extended beyond law enforcement. It included modeling integrity and accountability. The recent events at the gas station served as a subtle example. Small choices carried meaning, and consistency in decision-making mattered. The officers nodded, some exchanging quiet glances, understanding the depth behind his words. Later that day, the chief received a phone call from the gas station owner. The woman had been back at the store the day before, but this time she had not approached the chief directly. Instead, she had been seen speaking to others, her frustration clear, but her actions restrained. The owner informed him that the community had begun discussing the chief's handling of the situation, some praising him, others questioning whether he had been too rigid. The chief listened, acknowledging the information without reacting emotionally. Public opinion was varied, and part of leadership was navigating those currents without losing sight of principle.